Hi, Ward 2 residents. My name is Howard Garrett. I am the chair of the Ward 2 Democrats, and we're here with Elissa Silverman, who is running for DC Council at large in the independent race. We brought her here today to talk about priorities in Ward 2 and what she has envisioned, not only for our community, but how to help Ward 2 residents with issues and priorities that concern us most. Alyssa, we appreciate you so much for being here. Thank you for joining our conversation, and we're excited to hear your vision and your priorities concerning Ward 2. I'll now turn it over to Ben to introduce himself, and then we'll begin the conversation.
Yes, my name is Ben Dalley. I am a longtime Ward 2 resident, ANC commissioner, and communications chair for the Ward 2 Democrats. Thank you very much for joining us today. I'm excited to talk about your vision for DC and your vision for Ward 2.
Great. Well,
Uh,
thank you, Howard and Ben, and good afternoon to Ward 2 Democrats. My name is Elissa Silverman, and I'm here to persuade and ask you to vote for me in the at-large independent special election, which is going to coincide with the primaries on June 16th. This seat opening was caused by Kenyan McDuffie, who was then an independent, resigning to run for mayor. And that created a special election, which everyone, no matter if you're a Democrat, independent, Republican, statehood green, can vote in the special election on the 16th. Some of you might know me. I served 2 terms on the council as an independent in the at-large role. So I think the most obvious question is, why the heck do you want to do this again? And I will say there's a few reasons. Number one is the Trump administration, its recklessness, and the perilous state of our democracy in DC. Thousands of Ward 2 residents, I think it might be accurate to say thousands, have lost their jobs because of Trump's, as I said, absolute recklessness and disregard for the law. I think we need to be strategic in how we respond. And I will say, talking about vision, I think you've used that term several times, Howard and Ben. My vision is we need to have a much more coordinated response and collaborative response between the council, especially the attorney general, the mayor, and our delegate in the future, whoever that might be. Happy to talk more about that. Number two, because of the destruction that Trump has had to our economy, we need to spend our $22 billion budget much more effectively. And those who do know me know I pay attention to the budget, and I care very much about oversight and holding our government accountable to you, the taxpayers. It is something that I was known for over my 8 years. And yes, it did cause some people, especially those who weren't performing well in their DC government contracts, not to like me, because I believe that you should get a good return on your investment for your taxpayer dollars. Third, I had some experience in our neighboring government, Maryland, and every day I look out the window and I say, what am I doing here? This is not where I should be. So I decided to put my hat in the ring again for the at-large seat. Here's my quick elevator pitch, and then I look forward to our discussion. Here's what I think I offer you that's different than the other candidates on the ballot. I have the experience, 8 years of experience of getting really hard things done, like DC paid family and medical leave. My bill oversaw implementation. Tens of thousands of workers now benefit from it. Public housing maintenance and repair fund. We had deferred maintenance on all of our public housing properties. They were falling apart. It was embarrassing that we were the landlord to these decrepit properties. I advocated and we got done a maintenance repair fund. I know I'm supposed to keep it short, so I would just say it's that track record of leadership and asking hard questions and having hard conversations to get results that really makes the difference in my race. And that's why I've been endorsed by 13 organizations, from teachers to hotel workers, to the Sierra Club, to DC Women in Politics. Thank you so much. And I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for being here. Given your experience, I'm excited to hear about what your past experience is and some of these topics we're going to discuss today, as well as your vision for the future. So let's start with public safety. What strategies would you pursue to improve public safety and community well-being in Ward 2, including downtown, Logan Circle, Chinatown, Foggy Bottom, DuPont Circle, and all of our great neighborhoods?
Great. So Ward 2 really is the ambassador of our city because many people who visit here end up in Ward 2, and certainly it's home. And I know this because I did redistricting to about 90,000 of our residents. I'm going to pick two things and then you guys can pursue more. First, I think we have a real opportunity with whoever the new chief of police might be to finally do community policing in an evidence-based way. And we don't need to look to other places. We have done the work. We just have never implemented properly the staffing. Our DC auditor did a staffing study that said, here's how we should be staffing MPD to have real community policing approach that's effective and evidence-based. And actually, it does look to other jurisdictions who've done it well. One thing I haven't talked about a million times, Howard and Ben, and this is actually the first time I've said it, is in my time away from the council, I did the MPD Citizens Academy because I do value public safety. I wanted to understand MPD better, and I thought it was a great opportunity because I wasn't a council member to do it. So I wouldn't get sort of the council member's view. I would get a citizen's view, and participated with 20 of my fellow citizens, and they tried to do a ward distribution. So there were, I think, at least a few Ward 2 residents. I'm a 30-year resident of DC, mostly now in Ward 6. What people want is visible police presence, to know their officers, both businesses that are very important and restaurants. I think half the restaurants in the city are in Ward 2. So they want to have that community policing approach, but we need for it to be evidence-based and effective. I'd say the other big issue that's impacted Ward 2, in my opinion, in the past few years has been homelessness. One thing that I did pay attention to, and the Washington Post former columnist, retired now, Colby King, said nobody paid more attention to the Housing Authority than I did. The Housing Authority is our partner in issuing the vouchers that get folks off the street, permanent supportive housing. But my focus, and this is a moving forward issue, Howard, as you said, is we need to provide the services. It's called permanent supportive housing with emphasis on support. Just because we move people into a unit doesn't mean they're going to be successful living autonomously on their own. We need to do a much better job making sure that, first of all, we get the vouchers issued, we get people into apartments and off the street, and then they stay off the street. So I'll stop there and happy to have you guys pursue more questions.
What is your definition of community policing?
It is, I think, a neighborhood-based approach in which the neighbors, like the residents and the businesses, are an active participant in helping our PSAs actually patrol the neighborhood. And what I'll say, Howard, is I'm not an expert on this, but there are folks who are. And what I would say is the most important thing to me is let's follow what those experts say. And experts can be both. At University of Maryland, there's a big violence-interruption center with an expert, Thomas Apt. He wrote a book that's actually, I think, right here. Oh, maybe it's downstairs. It's called Bleeding Out. Actually, I have this other book. So Chief Lanier suggested two books to me, When Brute Force Fails and Bleeding Out, which maybe I lent that to somebody. But the other approach, which is part of like both MPD and the model around violence interruption, is that there are a few people who create a lot of problems. And what we need to do is focus on those people to get them hopefully to change their behavior, to give them the supported services they need. And if not, we need to act swiftly. And that's the point of bleeding out, is you have to act swiftly and with certainty that there are repercussions for their bad behavior, for breaking the law, for taking a life. So I hope that answers your question, Howard.
That does. I read a book called Palaces for the People. I'm not sure if you heard of it, but it talks about public safety in the manner of we always try to change or solve public safety by the individual versus the environment the individual is acted upon. And I feel like that's where our city has failed. We spend so much time on the individual and trying to be reactive versus solving the issue of the environment, the vacant buildings, the libraries that are not adequate to meet the needs, the playgrounds, the rec centers that are not efficient or up to date or modernized. Those are the ways that I am truly passionate about, that I would urge and continue to talk to council members. We have to try a different approach. As you stated, we've already done the work and the studies, but yet the implementation has not been implemented. And that's where at some point, we have to be like, okay, what we're doing is not working. And I wish we could go with that approach of start changing the environments. I mean, as an ANC commissioner, there's many vacant buildings in my ANC district that are owned by DHCD, and they've been vacant and abandoned. And I put 301 tickets and email them so often because of the lack of maintenance and care, and but also the process and the ambition to do something with it. And those small buildings could be centers, they could be daycare centers where students can go after school, they can be homes. We have to think outside of the box. So that's, yeah, I just had to go off my spill on that.
No, that's great. Well, there's a question that will tee up your response,
Okay.
which is regarding public spaces and quality of life. What steps would you take to ensure Ward Two's public spaces, including buildings owned by the city, libraries, parks, community facilities, are well maintained, welcoming, actively used by residents and visitors?
We need to do oversight over DGS. We need to activate those spaces. In fact, regarding the youth curfew, as there are some cities that are activating those vacant spaces as places where young people can congregate. And even in this campaign, I've spent some time, I was a former reporter, so I like to go to the source. So I spent some time with some of the seniors at Thurgood Marshall who told me I go to Navy Yard. And I said, why? And they said, because I like Chipotle. I live in Ward 8. I don't want to go to the Chipotle on Alabama Avenue. I want to go to the one in Navy Yard because there's more stuff to do there after I eat my burrito. But they want to do stuff like learn how to do studio. They make TikToks. So other cities, and this is actually internationally, are taking those vacant spaces and they're making like a music studio out of them. And they're teaching kids about film editing and, having a music studio and sort of activating those spaces in a productive way. But certainly we want those commercial spaces to also be activated in a revenue producing way, and not just for the city's bottom line, but for the thing that I think makes Ward 2's neighborhoods really special, whether it be Shaw or Georgetown, DuPont Circle, is those little retail hubs that, in my opinion, create a third space where people can go and they congregate and they have coffee and they see their neighbors and they go to the 14th Street hardware store, which is employee owned. And that's what makes a community. I think you have some great ideas, but here's what I would say. The execution is where we fail. And I know this from being labor chair. Just because you give someone a job, if they've never had a job, if they haven't been used to waking up at a certain time of day and having to work with people and having to tell their boss why they can't make it one day, people don't automatically learn that. It has to be taught. DC Central Kitchen, their culinary arts program, is a program that the only earmark I ever did at the council was $1 million to jumpstart their new facility. because their culinary training program doesn't just get people into jobs, it changes their lives and it changes their behavior. One of the biggest things when you work in a restaurant is you got to work in a team, and not everyone gets along all the time. And sometimes it gets heated. And a big problem that a lot of our residents have, especially residents who've dealt with a lot of trauma in their life, is getting triggered by any kind of conflict. And it happens in every workplace. It happens in our family lives too. And they call them soft skills, but they're not soft at all. They're like the fundamental skills of being a really productive adult. The third and final thing that I know we have other topics is, as I said, I'm a 30-year DC resident, but I grew up in Baltimore. And Baltimore right now has seen the largest drop in violent crime in the country. And it is because Mayor Scott and a friend of mine, City Council President Zeke Cohen, is following the model from the University of Maryland's Violence-Interruption Center and Thomas Abt, who wrote Bleeding Out. They are following the evidence-based practices and putting them to use, and it works.
That's a great transition to another question we have for you, which is regarding small business and economic vitality. You talked a little bit about employment. You talked a little bit about vacant spaces. You talked about having neighborhood hubs. Ward 2 has seen an increase in commercial vacancies in recent years. What policies would you pursue to strengthen small businesses, activate vacant storefronts, and support a vibrant local economy in Ward 2?
So I will say, I already said, I think what makes a neighborhood great is not only the residents, but the businesses.
Yeah.
And having that neighborhood serving retail. And I think our city needs to look at how we jumpstart and seed and perhaps subsidize certain neighborhoods serving retail. I think we need to work with both the Restaurant Association, and there used to be a group called Think Local First, which specifically represented small businesses. I think Andy Shalal was like a member, locally owned businesses that were not part of the DC Chamber, but we need to work with the Chamber too. And I am big on not coming up with 20 ideas, but coming up with 3. What are the 3 biggest things we could do that evidence-based, again, what has worked in other cities? The idea of using the vacant storefronts, Kansas City is doing that right now to seed businesses, local businesses that they can't afford a storefront. It's kind of like the food trucks of retail, to sort of get them in the space, get them going, get them being successful. And then the other model we have, I think, is supporting our bids. I know you have a number of them in Ward 2, that, and some of the original ones too. And we need to make sure we're supporting them and then addressing the issues. I talked about homelessness. I think that having all those tents at DuPont Circle wasn't an incentive to get to people to walk around DuPont Circle. So we need to have our social services also be in touch with our business community and make sure we're addressing the real concerns.
Another part of having a thriving business area is getting people to that area. So the next question is regarding transportation and mobility. What transportation and mobility policies would you prioritize to ensure Ward 2 is safe, accessible, and efficient for pedestrians, cyclists, transit riders, drivers, driverless cars, and everything else that we use to get around this city?
Yeah, this is a big question. First, on safety, is DDOT has the data on what are the most dangerous streets in the city. We know what they are. And what I would say is, let's address in Ward 2 the top 5 most dangerous streets and intersections. Obviously, I'm a citywide member. We need to do this across the city. But the Post did a story on this. So my data, maybe in 2020 or something. And I remember on Southern Avenue, Ward 8, people were going like 110 miles an hour. It was the number 1 most dangerous street. So I can't remember what the most dangerous street was in Ward 2. Maybe it's Connecticut, maybe it's Wisconsin. I don't know. But we need to just, I think this is where we have the data lead us and say, where are the most crashes? Where are the most pedestrian accidents? Let's bring the experts in from DDOT to address that. I have been supportive from before I was a council member in doing more bus rapid transit. And I would do bus rapid transit on K Street to get people across the ward. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think because it's a lot cheaper. I live off of H Street, which now is our no longer streetcar street.
Yeah.
K Street doesn't need a streetcar, but it needs a quick way for people to get across town. I live right near Union Station, and if you took that old circulator to get to Georgetown, it'd take you over an hour. That's just one way across downtown, but it does serve a lot of different neighborhoods, honestly. You're not too far from DuPont, you're the local Logan Circle Shaw area to Georgetown. So it does really cut across the ward. I'd be supportive of that. And then I am a bike rider, as a lot of people know. I bike commute. And we need to, I think, accept that we have various modes of transportation in our city that are non-vehicular. We have a lot of cyclists now. I'm not an expert in this area, except being what I call an acoustic cyclist, a non-electric vehicle cyclist. We have a lot of very fast moving non-car vehicles now. And I think we can't put the genie back in the bottle. So we have to figure out who's appropriate for using a bike lane, who's appropriate for using the street in areas like in your ward, especially heavily trafficked foot areas like 14th Street. Are the sidewalks appropriate size for the density and population? And again, I did go to urban planning school, but I never finished. So I would leave that to all the folks in my class at University of Maryland that finished their degrees.
Well, one piece of urban planning, of course, is housing, and that is a huge topic in this election. What policies would you support to address homelessness in Ward 2, while ensuring residents have access to housing, supportive services, and safe communities? I want to add also, Ward 2 has a lot of density. We also have a smaller footprint for most of our apartments, which means that people usually have to leave Ward 2. So I also want to know what kind of policies you have to keep people in their neighborhoods longer.
Sure. This is an area where I've spent a lot of time and have some expertise. I spent 8 years on the housing committee. And as I said, was considered probably the council's foremost expert on the housing authority. To address your immediate question, Ben, as I said, the main tool we have to get people off the street and into housing, and that's what we want, both for us as a city, for Ward 2 residents and businesses, and for those folks on the street, is get them into housing. Where we've fallen down is that the program is called Permanent Supportive Housing, PSH, and we haven't provided the proper supports. What are supports? That's making sure there's a social worker who's keeping track of the resident who gets the voucher. A lot of the folks who come off the street do have some kind of behavioral health issue, and making sure that they're going to their appointments, they're taking their medication, making sure, and this is what one landlord told me, that they know how to live. Some folks, this is their first time living in an apartment on their own in a long time. So if the toilet backs up, they know what to do. They know how to use a plunger, and they have one in their unit. It's all those things. And it sounds simple. It's not. I know it's not. But it's about making the investment, because right now we have a problem of trust with our landlords and residents in multi-unit buildings, that they don't want to accept more people with PSH vouchers because we haven't held up our end of the bargain about supportive services. So we need to do that. I'd love to be on the housing committee. I'd love to chair the housing committee and be on the human services committee to really work with the agencies involved to make this program a lot more successful, as well as work with the landlords. And I've talked to those groups about this issue. In terms of family housing, we need to have a lot more housing that meets our needs as a city. I think one big change we need to start making is that everyone thinks of the only place you think of where families live in multi-unit housing at all income levels is New York City, right? You know, people rich and poor grew up in New York. They live in an apartment building. I have friends, they've lived their entire life in a multi-unit building. They don't know what it's like to live in a single family home. We're getting to that point. And so therefore we need to have not only housing in terms of number of bedrooms. You know, right now, most of the new housing we build are studio and one bedroom. So who's gonna be attracted to that? Single people, and either people at the beginning of their relationship or at the end of their lives, right? They don't have kids. Or, and I think this is an increasing reality, they don't have multi-generations. We have a lot of people who, for childcare reasons, their parents are coming back to live with them, or we have adult children who are coming to live with their parents. And we need to accommodate multi-generational housing. That's not just parents and young kids. So we need to do that. We need to prioritize it with the housing subsidies that we have, like the trust fund, like inclusionary zoning. I think we need to, in Ward 2, not exempt any areas from inclusionary zoning. And I don't like to use jargon. So this is when a developer builds and we give them a little bit of a density bump as an incentive to build more affordable housing. So they get a little bit more space, and in return, we ask them to build some affordable units for us. Here's what I'll say about Ward 2. You guys live in a desirable ward. People want to live in Ward 2, which makes the land very expensive. So we need to, I think, utilize whatever housing authority properties we have in Ward 2, which we do, and make sure that when we look to redevelop them, that we are redeveloping them both with the current community in mind and with our bigger community in mind, doing some perhaps mixed use projects, which would combine affordable and market units, in which the market units would subsidize the affordability. That's a lot of talk about housing, but basically we need to be more strategic and smarter, and also preserve there are some affordable units. I have friends who live in rent controlled buildings in Ward 2, and they don't want to leave because they're paying a great rent to live in a great neighborhood. We need, as a city, to make sure those units don't sell to a private developer that then makes them unaffordable.
One thing you spoke to early in that discussion was focus on accountability, especially as it related to DC Housing Authority related to the vouchers. So next question is going to be about accountability and results. If elected, what measurable goals or outcomes would you commit to achieving for Ward 2 during your first term as it relates to holding agencies accountable and moving the needle as far as DC services?
I mean, across the board. For example, we need 911 to pick up the phone if somebody in Ward 2 calls 911, whether it be on the street because they see someone in distress, or there's an accident, or God forbid, somebody has a heart attack or something like that. You know, there are performance metrics that are best practices in 911, and I'm not sure we're following them. You always read the outlier stories, but I did spend some time as a council member in the Office of Unified Command, and my observation, which actually was documented in an auditor's report, is calls aren't being classified correctly. And that means we're not sending the right response to those calls. When it comes to the thing, DPW, you know, one of the biggest things I've heard being out of the council now is my trash doesn't get picked up. That services just aren't as reliable as they used to be. And I don't think that's anyone's imagination. I think it's true.
We have trash outside still right now in my house. That's supposed to be picked up on Monday.
You know, and you put in the
It's
311
Wednesday.
nothing happens.
Thursday, yeah.
So those are things that I think we can have metrics and KPIs that, you know, if you put in a 311 response on trash, there's a 24-hour response time in getting it addressed and picked up.
I also think like the 311 app has to work. It is the most annoying thing as ANC commissioner. Is one of my top 2 pet peeves. The app is horrendous.
It's janky and it's not user friendly. And here's what I would say to that, Howard, which is we have to accept in district government finally that most people interact with us online.
Yeah.
And I think in DMV, I give Mayor Williams all the credit for this, because when I moved here in like 1996, I always joke that getting your driver's license was like a 3-day hand-to-hand combat exercise in which you're not sure if you were going to get it in the end. And what we did is use technology to our advantage. We need to really take the role of CTO in our government really seriously, because that's how most of our residents interact with us, is through 311 or a request app, or through health insurance, like with Medicaid and the DC Alliance or TANF. They're getting a lot of their services, or the school lottery. They're getting their services from us through online services, and they need to work. We need to prioritize it.
Yes, I agree.
So last question is regarding equity and inclusion. How will you ensure that Ward 2's economic growth and development benefit long-term residents, workers, and small businesses, not just new investment?
I can specifically think of some of our senior buildings at 12th and M in your ward, where it's like, using an app is not going to be their first response to getting a DC government service. So we
Yeah.
have to make sure that everyone's included. And at least when it comes to age inclusion, I'm sensitive to this because I have 86 and 91-year-old parents. God bless them. They're still alive. I'm very fortunate. But I'll just tell you that I have to go to their house in Baltimore because my dad is convinced that they use streaming, which much praise to them. And he's like, all of a sudden, all the local channels left, Elissa. I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to reboot the antenna. I don't know. But, I understand that, look, my dad went to college. This is not an issue of education. It's an issue of like, you get older and, you're less nimble about adapting to technology. So we need to make sure and work. And I'm on the board of Seabury Resources for Aging. There are certain senior groups like Iona and Seabury. We need to work with them to say, how do we help people get this service when we're mostly online? In terms of racial equity, I think that's another big issue for our city. We need to make sure that longtime resident and class, based income as well. We need to make sure that people who lived in Shaw can remain in Shaw, and that we have some good models on 7th Street of affordable properties where people were able to remain. Shaw used to be a majority Black neighborhood. Now, I think I remember from redistricting, it's likely majority white now. So we had some successes, but we also had some failures.
That's where I'm the commissioner at.
Is that your area, Howard?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right in Shaw, right beside the Howard Theater, 2G01. That is you are speaking the truth.
So, but I think, and here's like the side. So my MPD Citizens Academy is new. And the second thing I'll say, I haven't said a lot to people is, and this is going to sound so weird, but I joined a tennis team and I've learned a lot from tennis in terms of how to deal with failure, right? Because Roger Federer, I don't know if either of you are tennis fans, but Roger Federer gave a very famous address at Dartmouth 2 years ago where he talked about he's like one of the most incredible tennis players of all time, and he only won 54% of his points. So we've had a lot of failures in our city about equity and inclusion. I think the term everyone likes to use is gentrification, but we need to learn from it and then try to do better. We can't throw our hands up and say it's over, and we can't say, oh, it's not really happening. We need to learn from it. And I think the lessons learned, as we talked about, there are some rent-controlled, affordable units in DuPont. And if I was in charge of the housing, THCD, and DEMPED, I would make sure I knew every single one of those, and we had a map of all of them. And when one of those went up for sale, the city would use what's called District Opportunity to Purchase, DOPA. And it's not that the city would purchase the property, it's just that we would exert our legal right to say, let's keep this property in DuPont Circle or in Howard's ANC affordable. Let's work with the tenants, pair them with a nonprofit developer so that we can keep this property affordable. I think too often we just let market forces take over and throw up our hands. And I think some of that was done. Some of those communities on 7th Street are an example of that. But we just need to be a lot more intentional. And I think we need to hold ourselves accountable. I feel like I went way over
No,
time.
this is
No, you're
great. This
actually
is
good.
great.
No, this is good.
Yeah.
This is good.
But obviously we know
But we are done.
affordability is the number one issue. And we know that housing, childcare and housing are like the number 1 and 2 costs. So I just want to add in, I actually have really close personal friends who lived on Swan Street in Ward 2, love living there, but they ran into they had twins and they have a very cute big dog. And they were like, we need more space. And moved out of Ward 2. They stayed in the city, but they moved out of Ward 2. And they always talk about they go back to DuPont Farmers Market like all the time, and they like romanticize, we're still here, blah, blah, blah. We should make sure we have housing that compete for them in Ward 2.
Yeah, I think Howard and I's designed to keep people in Ward 2. But we kind of have this larger issue, which is probably a good way to wrap up this conversation, is I'm happy your friend stayed in DC, but a lot of folks make the same decision and move outside of DC. Talked about a lot of issues here: housing, affordability, small businesses, public safety. It all kind of wraps up to DC being an enjoyable place to live and thrive. So, final question as we wrap up and say goodbye today. How would you, as the next at-large councilman, help DC thrive moving forward?
Well, I think we have to focus on our economy and budget, using it so we get a good return on investment. In terms of keeping families here, the thing I'm probably most known for, and I'm not sure I even talked about it, was DC paid family and medical leave as an incentive, sort of to feel like families are supported here. One thing I think I want to do is we have to be realistic that parents have to work, and we should make aftercare or out of school time free, part of our public education system. That's a major equity issue, in that if you're in some, Ward 2 is a very affluent ward, and some schools in Ward 2, there are families who are paying a lot of money for out of school time and very good programming. And in other parts of the ward, there's a much lower participation rate because it's expensive for families to participate. That shouldn't be the obstacle. We have working families, especially in Ward 2, where we have a lot of shift workers working at our hospitals who are our big employers. We need to have a school system that accommodates their needs and the needs of our kids. So that's a little part of a big question.
Yeah. Howard, anything else you want to wrap up before we say goodbye?
No, nothing. Thank you so much for meeting with us today. Very insightful conversation, great ideas. I love the fact that we are trying to find ways, affordable housing. I work in housing, I write policy for privatized housing. So I'm very passionate about housing and how it is a basic necessity to work, for people to play, for people to live. I love the fact that you want to hold the accountability with vouchers. That's very great to hear, but also great to hear about all of your ideas, not just for Ward 2, but for our city. So thank you again for being here. And we'll leave you with one last word and then we'll say goodbye.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. This actually was a great conversation. What I would say to Ward 2 voters is that what I offer you is a depth of experience, a track record of holding people in government accountable, and spending your money to actually get results and programs that work. And that's why I've been endorsed by a number of organizations, including organizations very important to Ward 2, hotel workers and our teachers, groups like the Sierra Club, and many other groups in the city who say, we miss you, we miss your voice, we need you to come back. So I ask for your vote in the June 16th at-large special election, and not just for your vote, but this is our first ranked choice election, so I'm asking for your #1 vote.
Thank you
And
so
you
much.
can go to my website, elissafordc.com. Sorry, I should have added that in. And I'll even give you my phone number, Ward 2, 202-386-2173. That's my cell phone. Feel free to give me a call if you have questions.
Thank you so
That's
much.
awesome.
Talk soon.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Take
thank you,
care.
Elissa.
All right.